Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to another exciting Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. It's still one of our first programs of 2025. We did over 400 together last year, and we are so excited to welcome you back if you've joined us before or welcome you for the first time. We've got a lot of new classes to start out this year, and it is so thrilling to get to feature the coolest stories of science and exploration around the globe. And so many of you are here today. We have over 1,000 kids from 5 Canadian provinces, 14 US states, and we even had a Nicaragua class for good measure. So a big welcome to absolutely all of you, and I'm so excited to get underway. Now, two quick notes before we dive in with our speakers. First, we are going to have a Kahoot today. So between our talk and our Q&A, we're going to play a little 4-question quiz together to test your understanding and have a little bit of fun. So if you want to pull up that game pin on a separate tab, you can do that anytime between now and when we get underway with it. And second, this isn't just any ordinary program. This is a special program as we are back with our Peak Discovery series. So this is a series we have done for years now, featuring the amazing folks at Canada's mountain parks. Now in British Columbia and Alberta, there are some really, really special parks. Not just some of the coolest places in our country, but some of the coolest places on planet Earth. Now, cool is a very good word for today because we are learning about staying cool. It's getting a little chilly here where I am in Newfoundland, and we are going to learn today about glaciers, what they are, what's going on, how are they changing, and more. The first of a two-part mini-series of the Parks team on these amazing natural features. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome in our whole Parks team. Lori, Laura, Michelle, welcome in, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today, and let's dive in and take it away.
Thanks, Jesse. Hello, bonjour, everyone, and welcome to Stay Cool Part 1, What is a Glacier? My name is Laura, and I'm joining you today from Glacier National Park in British Columbia.
And I'm Lori, and I'm joining you from Banff National Park in Alberta. We both work for Parks Canada, the organization that looks after national parks in Canada. So where in the world are we? Now, here's a map of Canada, and all of our national parks are marked in green.
The national parks where we are right now are located in the west. Let's zoom in.
Glacier and Banff National Parks are about 2 hours apart by road. Let us know in the chat if you have visited one or both of these national parks. We often call this whole region in this area the mountain parks because it includes national parks in the Canadian Rocky Mountains as well as the Columbia Mountain Range. So whenever we say the mountain parks today, we're talking about this whole area of places named under the green circle here.
Across the mountain parks, we share similar landscapes, dramatic peaks, deep valleys, cold rushing rivers, and thick wild forests. Banff and Glacier National Parks both have glaciers, and that's what we're going to dig into in this session. What is a glacier exactly, and why are they important?
Before we answer those questions, a quick word about the lands that we are on today. Banff National Park is within the present-day territory of the Treaty 6, 7, and 8 First Nations, as well as the Métis homeland. The lands and waters of Banff have been used for thousands of years by Indigenous peoples for sustenance, ceremony, trade, and travel. We thank them for their continuous stewardship and for sharing the land with us.
Parks Canada respectfully acknowledges that Glacier National Park and Rogers Pass National Historic Site are located within the traditional lands of the Ktunaxa, the Secwepemc, the Sinixt, and the Syilx Okanagan peoples. We recognize their stewardship of the lands and waters in the area since time immemorial. Parks Canada is committed to reconciliation and renewed relationships with Indigenous peoples based on a recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership.
Let's first answer the question, what is a glacier? Simply put, a glacier is a big mass of ice. But there's more to it than that. A glacier won't form just anywhere. Outside of polar regions, they usually happen on mountains. Mountains get a lot of snowfall. But why? Air scoops up moisture from the ocean and carries it up over mountain ranges. As the air rises over the land, it cools, so it can't hold on to all that water anymore. When the air rises high enough, the temperature drops below the freezing point. All the water vapor starts to gather up and freeze into beautiful snowflakes. And when you get enough snowflakes swirling through the air, they start to get heavy. They begin to fall out of the sky onto the mountain tops.
Now, here's the other thing to understand about mountaintops. They're usually much colder year-round than all the valleys around them. Snow that fell in the winter might not all melt away in the summer. It stays on the mountain, and more snow can fall on top of it in the next winter.
Now, how do we go from that snow to glacial ice? Well, here's a neat trick. Snow changes shape over time. So the next time there's a fresh snow where you live, go out and look at the shapes of the flakes close up. Very delicate and pretty, right? As snow ages, those delicate shapes start to break. Flakes become squished by the weight of all the other snow on top. And if you happen to have a snowbank with older snow in it near you now, you can dig into it and check this out too. It starts to look like little grains of sugar, what we call granular snow. When even more weight is piled on top, that snow forms little pellets of ice called firn. The firn gets pressed together and the air gets squeezed out. Over decades or even centuries, it can make a huge mass of ice. And that is how a glacier is born.
When there's more snowfall than snow melt for many years in a row, we call that accumulation. If the weather trend is cold, then glaciers grow in mass and length. They collect more snow and make more ice. Accumulation. Now, the opposite of accumulation is called ablation. If the weather trend is warm, glaciers lose mass and length. They melt more snow and ice than they can collect. We call that ablation.
The upper part of a glacier where the snow doesn't melt completely during the summer is called the accumulation area. The lower part of a glacier where the previous winter's snow, as well as some ice, melts is called the ablation area. The line between the two is called the equilibrium line. Equilibrium is another word for balance. And the balance shifts to higher altitudes when the climate warms up, meaning that more of the glacier is melting, and that line descends in altitude when the climate cools down and less of the glacier is melting.
Accumulation and ablation are both happening every year on glaciers. It's the balance between the two that shifts with warming or cooling of the climate. Right now, we generally see more ablation during the melt season than accumulation during the snow season. So overall, our glaciers are losing mass.
Now, you might hear that a glacier is retreating if it's melting away. And the word retreating might make you think that the glacier is moving back uphill. It's not. A glacier is always moving downhill, pulled by the force of gravity. A retreating glacier is actually just melting away faster than it can move downhill. The ice moves like a slow motion river down the mountainside. It bends and cracks over bumps in the landscape. And you can learn more about how scientists discovered the motion of glaciers in Stay Cool Part 2, Secrets of the Ice. We'll tell you the details at the end. So that's what a glacier is. But why should we care about them? Most glaciers are in remote places that people don't go. In fact, you need special safety equipment to travel on glaciers because they're full of cracks called crevasses and dangerous mill wells or holes where you could fall in.
Glaciers are important as a source of fresh water. They hold the snow and ice from thousands of winters up high on the mountains. When glaciers melt, they slowly release cold water. The ice from the mountain national parks feeds rivers that cross the continent. That means that if you live in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and even some parts of the United States, you are getting water from these glaciers. They provide reliable water even during the driest and hottest times of year to farms, towns, and cities.
Not only human communities need this glacial meltwater, many fish and bugs need this cold, clear water to survive. In the Illecillewaet River in Glacier National Park, over 1/3 of the water comes from glaciers. In this case, that's almost 45,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools per summer. That amount of cold water makes a big difference to the species living there, like bull trout. They can't thrive in water warmer than 18 degrees Celsius or 64 Fahrenheit.
Glaciers are important for our climate. They act like big refrigerators for the Earth. They regulate global climate by cooling down the air and water. When the sun shines its warm rays on the Earth, light-colored surfaces, like glaciers, reflect some heat back into space so the Earth doesn't get too warm. Dark surfaces, on the other hand, like pavement, tend to absorb the heat from the sun rays instead and keep it within our atmosphere.
Pollution or ash from forest fires can stick to glaciers and darken their surface. This makes them absorb more heat from the sun and reflect less back into space. It increases the rate of melt even more. When glaciers shrink and contribute less cool water to rivers, drought can increase wildfires and change forest species.
Glaciers are part of our history. They've shaped the mountains, the valleys, and the plains that we live in. Millions of people visit glaciers in Canada every year. They take those memories home and share stories with friends and family.
Glaciers are important for culture. For as long as humans have been here, glaciers have inspired stories and folk tales. Artists have spent their lifetimes chasing them for their shimmering beauty and the dramatic landscapes that they've carved.
Glaciers are also important for our economy. They attract tourists who spend their money to support mountain communities. The fresh water provided by glaciers nourishes farmland across Western Canada, and it also produces hydroelectricity. Now, because glaciers are so important, we study them. I'd like to welcome our special guest, glacier researcher Michel Beauchemin, to answer a few questions about his work. Hi, Michel.
Hi, Laura. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being here with us. So my first question for you is, what is your job at Parks Canada?
I am a resource management officer, and specifically, I am the field coordinator for the monitoring work we do on glaciers inside Glacier National Park.
All right. So you say you're monitoring glaciers, but why do you study them?
That is an excellent question. We study glaciers because they are indicators of the health of the alpine ecosystems in our parks. As mentioned earlier, their meltwater provides a considerable amount of fresh water to the aquatic ecosystems downstream. Many fish species, algae, and invertebrates depend on their cooling effect for their survival. This supply of cold water is also especially important during extended droughts during the summer. During those periods, the people living downstream can also rely on this water for drinking, agriculture, fisheries, and for the production of electricity. Glaciers are also an important part of the landscape in the mountains of Western Canada, and visitors from around the world come to see them and recreate on them.
So what changes have you seen since you started your work?
Since I started working on the Yellow Silhouette Glacier just over 10 years ago in 2013, its front has considerably receded, and the ice in the ablation area has become much thinner. More crevasses have opened up, and pre-existing ones have become wider. This poses a real challenge to glacier travel. Most strikingly, the equilibrium line has moved quite high on certain years. For instance, in 2023, we had a thin snowpack to start with, and summer temperatures started in late April, early May, leading to a record melt on the glacier. That year, the equilibrium line moved higher than 2,700 meters, which is the highest elevation found on the glacier. So this means that in 2023, there was essentially no accumulation area on the Yellow Silhouette Glacier, and all parts of it experienced a significant melt.
So why do you think people should care about glaciers?
As mentioned earlier, glaciers are an essential part of the mountain landscapes of Western Canada. People come to take pictures of them, ski, and climb on them. They provide water that is essential to both the ecosystems and the people that live downstream from them. They are an indicator of climate change and give us an idea about how our planet is doing under a warming climate. Studies have also shown that if all ice was to melt on Earth, the sea level would rise by 60 to 70 meters, with many large cities throughout the world found on the coast of various oceans just above sea level. Hundreds of millions of people would be affected.
Wow, well, thank you for clarifying all of this for us, Michelle. For everyone listening, Michelle will be with us at the end if you have any questions. So feel free to note your questions down and we will ask them at the end. Now, I'd like to ask everyone here, has anyone ever heard of a budget? Yeah, a budget, like how much money you can spend each month. Jesse, you've heard of it, right?
I have indeed. Budgets are the best.
Yeah, so glaciers have a budget too. Mountains store massive amounts of water in the form of snow and ice and release it slowly when it's needed in the summer. Sort of like having a piggy bank. If you put more into it than you spend, you're saving money. If you spend more than you save, then eventually you'll run out of money. Or in the case of glaciers, you'll run out of ice.
Glaciers in the mountains in Canada are losing more ice than they're gaining each year. You can see here how in just 10 years, the Pito Glacier in Banff National Park has lost a significant amount of ice and gained a new meltwater lake at its toe. Already, about 300 glaciers completely melted away between 1920 and 2005 in the mountain national parks.
The loss of glaciers and the water that they store is going to have an impact on every community downstream from here. That includes several big cities across 4 provinces in British Columbia, Alberta, and our neighbors Saskatchewan and Manitoba, plus an enormous amount of farmland that feeds all of us. Glacier melt adds water to rivers at the hottest and driest times of the year.
Our mountain parks are places where we preserve nature and protect glaciers. But even though we set aside these special places, they're still connected to the global systems that drive the water cycle and the climate. We know that mountain tops are warming faster than other parts of the Earth, and this puts our glaciers at risk. Some scientists say that most of our glaciers will disappear by the year 2100.
So what about today? The United Nations has designated 2025 as the International Year of Glaciers Preservation. I encourage you all to learn more about special events for this important year, like the first ever World Day for Glaciers that will take place on March 21st every year, starting in 2025. Even though glaciers may be far away from where you live, they have an important role to play in providing you with fresh water, food, healthy rivers, and beautiful places to visit, like Banff and Glacier National Parks.
So be sure to join us for Stay Cool Part 2, Secrets of the Ice, on February 4th in English and on February 5th in French. We will talk to glacier scientists, past and present, to discover what tools they use to study glaciers and what they have found out in over 130 years of glaciology. So now I think we have time for some questions and the Kahoot, Jesse.
And the Kahoot, we've got everything. Well, first and foremost, for all of you, thank you so much for such an engaging presentation, the extra bonus expert answers and more. That was so much fun. And we've got kids from all over the place. Over 75 people at last look signed into our Kahoot. So we're going to dive in with that in just a second. 4 quick questions. If you guys want to jump in and help us out with any hints for the answers, that would be great. And then we're going to dive in with questions. So our live classes, I know we've got some tech difficulty, so live groups on StreamYard, please do share in the chat. And then YouTubers, there's so many of you, please do put it in the chat. Any questions you want to know about glaciers, we are going to field them all together over the next 20 minutes or so. But for those who are new to Kahoot, over almost 100 of you that are in right now, the faster you answer, the more points you get. And what you win is the everlasting respect of the entire Parks Canada staff and I. So that's pretty cool. We are going to get underway in just a second. It looks like we're going to get to 100 of you, which is awesome. Let's do it and get started. Here we go. Who is paying attention? We're going to find out momentarily. Dun, dun, dun. 3, 2, 1, and we are off. All right. Glaciers in Canada are ... getting larger, getting smaller, staying the same size, or we have no idea. This whole program was all for naught. We have no clue. We haven't been looking at all. I don't think that's the answer. What do we think? Getting larger, getting smaller? Get those answers in. Well, let's see. And one more second. Nice. Most of you, almost everybody got this right. A few of you thought getting larger. There are some glaciers in the world that have gotten a little bigger, but the overwhelming majority of the ones in Canada that we were talking about today are getting smaller. This is one of our big impacts of climate change that we've talked about in a variety of glacier programs over the years. And it looks like Brave Unicorn has our lead going into question 2. All right, I'm going to let you folks chime in on this. Now, I framed this question before you phrase it the way you phrase it, but glaciers are inaccessible. No one can go. I don't know. I think in Banff and in Jasper National Parks, you might be able to head to the glacier.
Yeah, we've got a kind of a special spot on the Athabasca Glacier. Some folks may have seen the Columbia ice field.
Yep.
Quite close up. Yeah.
So most of them thought this was false. Fantastic. There's like 120 plus of you in the Kahoot. I have been to a glacier. I have not been to a Canadian glacier, ironically. I've seen them in other countries, but glaciers around the world are typically tremendous tourist sites because they're such incredible landscape features, and it's really important to be able to go visit them and see them firsthand. So I hope everyone gets that chance. All right. Funny Condor takes our lead as we go to question 3. The Columbia ice field is at its deepest. How thick? So these huge glacier things, how deep are they? Are they 30 feet deep? Are they 300 feet deep? Are they a few inches deep just spread over a really, really far area? Or can they be over 1,000 feet taller than a skyscraper? Any hints? They're in the mountains. They're pretty big. Let's see what we got.
Not like peanut butter on toast. That's for sure.
No. Wow. So a lot of people thought 300 feet. No, glaciers can be over 1,000 feet deep. And in fact, Canada and the northern part of the United States used to be under miles thick of ice back in the Ice Age. So literally like 4,000 or 5,000 feet of ice, which is insane to think about and so cool. All right. Does that change our leaderboard? Funny Condor keeps our lead. Our final question. We talked vaguely around this today, but glaciers help shape much of the landscape of Canada. True or false? Any hints, folks? What do we want to highlight?
Well, there's only one force that can move that much rock.
Yep.
And carve mountain shapes like that, like U-shaped valleys.
We have got, I've seen U-shaped valleys in person. I've been to Banff, of course, National Park, but like all of Ontario where I grew up is heavy duty influenced by glaciers. If you walk around Canada and you think of it as a place that's been formed by glaciers, so much that otherwise would not make sense makes sense, which is amazing to think about. Most of you got this right. Let's see what that does. And then we are going to go to our questions. So Ms. Dolacoin, you have already shared a question. Please keep those questions coming in the chat. Everyone, StreamYard, YouTube, we'd love to hear from you. Our winner of our Kahoot for all the marbles and everlasting respect, Funny Condor. Way to go, guys. Thank you, all of you, for participating. And so our first question from Ms. Dolacoin's class, how long does it take for a glacier to visibly change? So we highlighted some of those great pictures. Michelle, you talked a little bit about this. How long to change? Can we see it within a year, 2 years, 10, whatever?
There can be significant changes happening like over a matter of seconds if we think about it, because sometimes glaciers can actually, they will have like big crevasses on them, but another part of a glacier is what we call seracs. And sometimes you can have like catastrophic serac falls. So seracs are like huge towers of ice, and these can fall in a second. And you look at it one moment and the next second, it's going to be completely different. So they can change quite fast. Otherwise, the toe of a glacier can also recede like significantly within a year.
I love that you highlighted these giant calving things because it's one of the most dramatic things that can happen on planet Earth. I've seen footage of like kayakers up in the Arctic and the whole front of a glacier will collapse into the ocean. That's actually quite a dangerous situation to be near. So neat question, guys. And I love the imagery. If you want to, we can always highlight some of the pictures too, but it's always been one of the most jarring things to me to witness a glacier's retreat, so to speak, over the course of decades. The fact that we have that kind of footage is really, really, it's profound. So thanks, guys, for our first question. All right, Ms. Cork's class, great question. Does tourism damage the glacier? So we're putting people up on them on the Columbia ice field. What impact does that have? Lori, if you want to lead with that one.
Sure. Well, glaciers are a big mass of ice. So us being on them and approaching them in and of itself is not particularly damaging to a glacier. It's just going to, do its icy thing. But the thing that in the bigger picture, tourism, flying around in jet planes, driving a car or a big RV around, burning up lots of fossil fuels, that's what's really having an impact on the glaciers. There's no question that the amount of carbon, CO2, and emissions in our atmosphere is what's really challenging our glaciers' survival at this point in time. So it's sort of big picture tourism is a challenge for glaciers.
I love that you mentioned this. And by the way, the doing their icy thing should be the tagline for the next program we do, I think, in early February. So we're having this collective impact where every person's small little bit adds up to a grand thing that's changing the climate of our planet. But in terms of physically impacting, I've heard it said that if the opposite were happening, if we were like entering a major ice age and glaciers were advancing across our planet, there's basically no force that people could do in a short term to impact them. Like if we dropped a nuclear weapon on a glacier, which we would never do, and don't do that at home, it would barely put a dent in. Like glaciers are massive, they're thick, they're titanic, they take up huge swaths of this planet. So it is that slow cumulative impact that we're having. And I love that question, guys. So do go visit a glacier if you can, especially if you're close and you can head there on a bus or public transit in some way. Laura. I thought you were. Ali, Miss Irish class, they're joining us from a virtual school in Saskatchewan. They want to know a little bit extra. Do people climb the glaciers? And Laura, if you want to answer that one, go for it.
People definitely do climb the glaciers, and ice climbing is a big thing around here. The big thing to note is that it's super dangerous, and Michelle mentioned it briefly earlier. Glacier travel is very challenging because as the glacier moves down the slope, big cracks form in it. It goes over bumps in the landscape and it cracks, and those cracks are called crevasses, and they can be very, very, very deep. And glaciers are dynamic, so as it moves down, these cracks open. And as it keeps moving down, the cracks might close slowly again. So if you fall in a crevasse, first of all, it's very, very cold. You're basically encased in ice. And then again, it's really hard to climb up if you don't have the proper equipment because it's just slippery ice. And sometimes the hole at the top can be really hard to get out of. Sometimes the snow will kind of gather at the opening and make it really hard to climb out of it. And also sometimes it can be deceiving because some snow will gather on the top and cover the opening of the crack. We call that a snow bridge. And sometimes in the winter, they can be thick enough to support you, but sometimes they can collapse under you and you can fall in. And that's what a lot of ski tours will have to keep in mind when they go out and do some glacier travel. People will get roped up when they travel in the winter on glaciers, and also wear crampons to make sure that they can grip on the ice properly. So there is climbing, there's also hiking, or you can also hike around glaciers, which is one of my favorite things to do. I like to keep a distance. But like we mentioned earlier, there's definitely some big ice walls or seracs that can collapse at any moment. So it's good to keep that in mind, keep a distance, and make sure that you stay aware of your surroundings. But it is really cool to see that happen though, and to hear it in the distance also. The thundering groaning of a glacier falling down is super cool. So
we've had a few people that have skied solo across Antarctica, and people ask, what's the most dangerous thing? And they're like, it's not the cold, it's the possibility of being on a snow bridge and falling into a crevasse because you're totally alone. And so this is why when most tours do glacier work or walk on glaciers in any way, it's multiple people roped up, it's spread over a long distance, all the safety gear is there, a lot of prep goes into that, because these are not landscapes to be taken lightly. And that's why, frankly, if you're like you, Laura, and you're from afar and you can look at them, you get the whole sweep of the glacier in your field of view. It's beautiful and amazing, and a lot safer than actually being on the glacier itself. So thanks for the question, Ms. Irish class. Let's see, Miss Agrell Smith has a question. Do animals live on glaciers? Are we expecting any bears or caribou or anything else walking along the top? Whoever wants to field that, go for it.
I can speak to this. There are actually an entomofauna that is associated to glaciers. So that means basically smaller insects and vertebrates that live on glaciers. Some of them actually, we have like glacier worms that can even like dig like tunnels, in the ice and in the fern. But we do have a lot of little springtails. We have some little scorpion flies. So there's like quite a few actually little invertebrates that can live there. But otherwise, for larger land mammals, We're thinking about like maybe a wolverine, maybe a grizzly bear can travel on the glacier. And obviously, birds can definitely fly over them and land on them to eat all those small insects that live there. But other than like smaller insects, there's not very much that will live there.
Yeah, it's pretty forbidding. I do like the idea of a wolverine on a glacier. That would be such a metal program if you ever want to do that in the future. But you mentioned something that's such a niche thing and it's never been mentioned in the history of exploring by the seat of your pants. Everybody should look up springtails. They're super weird and cool and awesome and unlike any other thing in the insect world, and they're wicked. So that's my plug of the day in the Glacier program. Go check out springtails. They rock. Let's head. We got so much time for more questions, guys, so please keep them coming. There's already so many in the chat. Let's see. So a whole bunch of questions about what the oldest glacier is, how many glaciers there are. From Ms. Ayers, Ms. Court's class, can you speak to sort of the diversity of them and what the oldest might be? Anyone? Michelle, do you know that if you're a glacier expert?
So how many glaciers there are?
Yeah.
This is like, so we're talking here about Canada or in the world? Or
in Canada specifically.
In Canada, I don't have an exact number. It would be in the order of thousands of glaciers, I would imagine. Glaciers are very extensive, throughout the mountains of Western Canada, especially when you go towards the coast, closer to the Pacific Ocean. But then there are also a number of glaciers, in Northern Canada, especially in the Arctic archipelago. Every island there is covered with ice, basically. Yep. So that would be thousands.
We've stumped the scientist. I love when this happens. So these are questions that are so natural for classrooms to ask, but they are really challenging. It's almost impossible to go out and chart all of these. And you talk about Canada's north, thousands and thousands of islands, each of which have these fields of ice on top of them. So how do you measure? What's going on? We've had this question before and no one has been able to answer it. So way to go, guys, for getting a good one in. I will note on the age front that no glacier's been around since like the beginning of the Earth. Like the Earth is constantly changing. All the continents have moved. Antarctica used to be a tropical forest back in the dinosaur times. So all glaciers are fairly modern in geological time. I would say that Antarctica probably has the oldest glaciers on Earth. But that's a really, really neat question, guys. Thank you so much for that. All right, Miss Young's class. How big can a glacier get? What is the biggest that we have in the country, the world? Anything you can share on that?
Well, in the world, I think we had this question when we did Losing Blue. I think we figured that the Antarctic ice sheet was probably the biggest mass of ice in the world. Yep. Yeah. So we're looking to the poles to find the masses of ice. Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, this is really niche, but my mom's last name is Lambert, and the largest glacier in the world, I think, is the Lambert Glacier. So I'm very happy about that because it feels like I'm play a role somehow. Very self-serving of me, but great question, Miss Young. All right, let's see what other questions. The big question. What actions will we need to take to keep the glaciers from melting? What are we going to do, everybody? I'll leave it to you all to answer that one.
Well, I think it's not an individual scale action. I think we all need to talk about them more and bring them to, bigger courses of action, to political movements. And we need to tackle what Lori mentioned and Jesse mentioned earlier, climate change, because it is what's affecting glaciers the most. So the faster we can tackle climate change and hit the targets that the UN has set to not go above 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming of the global climate, the better our glaciers will do.
Yeah, it's an urgent issue because we had 2024 as the warmest year on record so far. And the warmer we get every year, the more ice is going to melt. So, 2025 being designated as the International Year of Glaciers Preservation is an important thing to raise awareness of glaciers and how much they impact our lives.
Yeah, exactly. Any action we can take to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases we are producing is a really good action to counterbalance, that glacier melt, to counteract it.
This is one of those things, too, that comes into play in all of our programs. So conservation, the nice thing about conservation things, whether it's for landscapes like glaciers or for wildlife on this planet, is that a lot of the solutions are the same. Do whatever you can to lower your carbon footprint. Don't waste. eat what you need to, maybe cut down on your meat consumption, which helps reduce carbon emissions. Choose sustainably sourced products that aren't going to savage ecosystems around the globe. So a lot of these things, a lot of our kids are doing already. Classrooms, you guys are the most engaged generation ever on this. You know the facts, you're super keen. So honestly, just keep it up. Encourage your parents and teachers in classrooms and schools to do the same, and it'll go a long way to helping preserve glaciers so that you can experience them and they can be the sort of sources for water for billions of people too on this planet, among many other things. Do check out our program too, February 4th and 5th, like lots more to explore and discover. It's really cool to have a 2-part series on this, so I hope you'll all take the chance to sign up at that Peak Discovery page, which I will bring up and share with all our teachers at the end of the broadcast as well. All right, folks, time flies and you're having fun. We've got time for a few more questions together. Miss Rahim's class, welcome in Maryland. They wanted to know, how big can a crevasse get? So these giant gaps in the glacier, anything you can share on that?
Yeah, crevasses can be, wow, they can be over, for some of them, especially on like very thick glaciers, they can be like over 10 meters wide, and which is like 30 feet wide, and can be like hundreds of feet deep. They can be like giant. They are definitely a significant hazard when to travel on glacier, and but yeah, so they can get quite large, and there's like all sorts of crevasses too. There's like crevasses that are along the flow of the glacier, some that are transversal, some that are found on the edge. There's like all sorts of different crevasses, but usually we find them mostly where the glacier rolls over. So
Cool.
that's where you would expect probably like the deepest ones, but up high on the glacier where it rolls over.
We've had some people come on the program that have lowered themselves into glacier. So again, very specialized scientific teams, but like going in with a rappelling and seeing what it looks like down there and taking samples. It's one of the coolest, literally and figuratively coolest things on planet Earth. So I'm glad we got that question. All right, I've got a really quick one, and then we got a cool one to end because I'm so glad someone brought this up. So what is the average temperature on a glacier? Is there like is it cold up? I know it sounds silly. Is it cold up there? Is it consistently colder than the rest of the landscape?
I'll chime in on this. So when people come to visit the Columbia Icefield, for example, which is just at the south end of Jasper National Park, they get there on a warm summer day, say it's 25 Celsius and beautiful sunny day, and they get to the toe of the glacier and there's this icy wind that is nonstop. It's called a katabatic wind. It's a special type of wind that the glacier generates in and of itself, because as the air sinks toward the glacier, that air gets cooled, it gets heavier, and it whisks down to the toe of the glacier. So even on a really hot summer day, people need to bring a windbreaker and a toque and some gloves to stand on that glacier, because it's always chilly. It's your refrigerator.
It's always chilly. Great question, guys. And then I love this one because I've had the chance to see this firsthand. I know you might have seen it in pictures before, but it's quite amazing, which is, why does glacier ice appear so blue, that deep, deep blue? That's so different from something like snow that we would see, or a glass of water that you have. Anything you can share?
Yeah, glacier ice is not like the kind of ice you can make in your refrigerator or your freezer. It's like we explained today, it's formed by hundreds to thousands of years of snow accumulation. So it's under a lot of weight. All of that snow gets really, really heavy, and the ice at the bottom gets under a lot of pressure. And it's under so much pressure that all of the air bubbles are squeezed out. And it's even under so much pressure that it gets kind of slimy or sticky like honey. So it slowly glides down the mountain and it picks up all sorts of things on the way. But because it's so dense and there's no air bubbles in it, it can't reflect all of the colors of the light spectrum anymore. So it absorbs most of them except for the color blue. So if you ever see a glacier and you're wondering why is it blue, it's not because of the sky. It's because it's a special kind of ice that the nature has specially created for the mountain.
I hope everyone gets a chance to see it in their lives in person, because it's so fantastic. The only other really neat blue color that I can think of in the world that really just jumps out to me is something that, Laura, you've done live from Lake Louise. The color of the lakes in Banff National Park are just so special and unique on this planet. So do check them out, folks, and I'm so glad we got that query. I will note for all our classes, I'm going to put a full email to all of you with extra resources to keep the learning going, including the Peak Discovery link. So much more to explore and discover. We've also got a special program with parks coming up in literally a week today on the Erebus shipwreck in the Arctic. So many more park stories to explore and discover in just a little bit. You can stay tuned for that. But before we wrap up and say farewell to all our classes from you three, is there any last message you want to leave us with before we say goodbye?
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Thank you for taking interest in the glaciers. And don't forget about part 2. We will be here again with you guys, and we will have some special guests, maybe time traveling guests, Lori.
Yes, indeed. Yes. And be sure to take note of those events that are coming up for the International Year of Glaciers Preservation. This is a year that's been designated by the United Nations. So it's a global project to raise awareness of glaciers and their importance in our lives.
Michelle?
Yes, this has been a great episode, and thank you everyone for coming. Glaciers are extremely valuable to all of us, as you've learned during this episode. So I hope that from now on, everybody, will have a little thought for the glaciers, especially this year for the International Year of Glaciers Preservation.
No better message than that. Thank you three so much. Do stick around with me after we are done live, but I'm going to put a call out for all our students, whether you're live with us on YouTube. If you want to scream and yell and say a big thank you in the classroom, annoy the principal, go for it, and we hope to see you again soon. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye for now.